going in,
Perfect. Perfect.
just to give everyone a chance to come in, so it's not boring like three guys standing around saying, "Oh, we're now live on all of these."
Right. Okay.
Cool, cool. And I am showing that we're live, and we caught the me explaining to you that I was going to tell everyone some community announcements before we come
Perfect.
in. So perfect. So as we come in, Vlad will join us in a moment. Good to see everyone here and everyone in the comments. If you guys have caught a live show, I'm sure you know that I generally like to make some community comments. I actually have a special one that we're going to hold on Vlad to come back for. But if you guys are here, please remember to do those: like, comment, subscribe to the shows on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on all your normal podcast platforms. Please follow Manufacturing Hub with Dave and Vlad if you guys are on LinkedIn. Again, we've had a bunch of folks from Clubhouse reach out, including the Open Oilfield Automation Group, which meets Thursdays at noon Mountain Time. I think it's still Thursday at noon Mountain Time. I know they were talking about potentially changing that. Please go ahead and take a look at those
That was
guys.
Friday, no?
Is it Friday? It might be Friday. If you guys are interested in having those conversations, Sean Terrell is the person that has reached out a couple of times talking about that. And he said it's always good conversations. I know I've been on at least one. I know Vlad's been on a couple with that. And now that we have Vlad back, I actually have a special ask for everyone. I was looking online earlier, and Solus PLC has crested the 19,000 subscribers. So if you guys haven't subscribed to Solus PLC, this is my push to get you guys above 20,000, Vlad.
Nice.
Thanks. Really appreciate it, Dave.
No,
Sign up right after this.
I honestly think it's amazing. I think you guys must have the largest, or one of the largest, YouTube communities. So please go ahead and do that. And again, before we get started and kicked off, we are rolling into our weekly schedule. We have another theme starting next week, and I think we're going to hold off at least until the end of the show before we announce what that theme is. But having said all those things, Vlad, would you like to kick off, or would you like me to kick off?
I'll let you do it this week, Dave.
Awesome. Fantastic. So everyone, welcome to Manufacturing Hub with Dave and Vlad. I am Dave. That's Vlad. This is episode 10, and we have our very special guest, Huck Bales. And Huck,
Hello,
you are the Associate Director of Engineering and Smart Manufacturing Solutions at Grantek. And I really do want to get into your background, but as I promised you, I'd like to start off talking about like what smart manufacturing is. Can you tell us a little bit about what smart manufacturing solutions are?
Sure. Smart manufacturing is everything from getting data out of PLCs and providing context to it, to MES systems, to analytics. It's all of the it's all the level 3 stuff that you find in the ISA model. I presume a lot of the audience will be familiar with ISA 95. So for us, it's all about getting information out of the controls layer and presenting it in a way that adds value to the process or the profitability of the business.
No,
it's a pretty broad thing for us.
No, it is. And as we've discussed, this is the manufacturing intelligence theme that we're going through. And I think that kind of sums up the goal of manufacturing intelligence, is getting the data out and presenting it in a useful manner.
Exactly. Yeah. And that means a lot of different things in different industries and for different customers, and for, where customers are in their ability to leverage the technology, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's many, different tangents that we can go on from here. And of course, there's the obvious one, which is technology. But one of the somewhat less discussed topic is change management, right? That comes into play with Industry 4.0, digital solutions. And I think it would be very interesting to get your perspective, right? As you mentioned, whether or not like the clients are ready to make that change. Like, what does that really maybe, first of all, entail? and how do you think about, let's say, approaching a new customer and presenting them with the, let's say, transformative journey into the digital space in manufacturing?
That's a hard question, Vlad.
Sorry, a little bit convoluted.
No, but I mean, it is the challenge, right? The thing about, when smart manufacturing is much bigger than MES, but a lot of what we do is MES. And the challenge with MES is that it's providing a platform for improvement, right? And so a lot of times we see a customer wants to come in and do a thing. They want to add an OEE system, or they want to do some SBC, but and so maybe there's a capital budget to go do this thing, but sometimes there's not enough investment in how's that gonna change the way people do their work, and how the business can benefit from the solution. So sometimes in my experience over the years, it's the change that there's two parts to it too. I think there's the opportunity that the new system presents to improve the business, improve the productivity, et cetera. And the negative side of that is that there could be groups that within the organization that get left out of the change and aren't ready for the change and don't accept the change. A few years back, I did a system where it was specialty chemicals, and we were doing recipe management, batch tracking of this whole system, and quality was a big part of it, but quality never came to the table. And we deployed the system, and guess what? It didn't meet the needs of quality, right? And so that was actually a big issue in that particular project. We actually put the go live on hold while we did a new cycle of adding functionality to support what the quality folks. Finally, the guy up top said, "Hey, quality, you need to come to the meeting," and so we did another cycle of development in order to meet the needs of that. So that's some of the challenges that you can face.
How do you, if I may kind of follow up on that thought, right, of the quality department or any other department for that matter, maybe not willing to follow suit, how do you like rope them back in, so to speak? Is it something that you do through the customer and you kind of reiterate the importance of the system, or is it more going directly to that department and trying to explain the benefits, or was it really, I guess, on the technical side that they were not aligned? I'm curious. I don't know how many details you can share about that specific project, but obviously, like in a general sense, because I think all three of us have seen, these challenges in different departments.
Yeah, and I think it varies, right? And I guess the important thing is up front, when you are scoping and defining the requirements for the project, is to make sure you understand who all the stakeholders are, right? And in this case, we knew that quality was there, but then also make sure that the sponsors are taking ownership of that stakeholder involvement. And in this case, that's what we are lacking, right? The sponsor was a little checked out. The production, our primary customer was the production management, and they had their own issues with quality, and so they're like, we're getting our thing and we're going forward, and if they don't show up, that's their problem. That's kind of how it shook out. And so I think that's the challenge. And on the delivery perspective, it's our responsibility to keep that issue visible with the customer. It's like, we're still not getting input from quality on this, so just sometimes that's as far as you can go with it, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think it's it's tough to get through some of those situations, and as you mentioned, there may have been like disagreements between departments, or their goals are simply not aligned. I've seen that as well, right? When they have their own KPIs in different silos, and so like one department is pushing ahead for a certain change while the other one is kind of looking in other directions. So for sure, there's a lot of challenges there.
and that's an interesting that you bring up KPIs, because of course that's a big part of what we do, right? Is helping customers get information about their system so they can measure if they're doing the right thing or not. But of course, you need to have the right measurements to really succeed with what you're doing.
Yeah, that's perhaps a mis-expectation of, I would say, like certain maybe leadership teams, in the sense that, they think that there's going to be this data solution that's going to show them this information presented to either upper management or the plant floor, and then the changes are going to maybe happen on their own, or improvements are going to drive themselves, so to speak. But I think it's important to also discuss the topic of, as you said, like continuous improvement, that this is not a one size fits all solution that gets deployed and just manages itself. There is a need for human investment, so to speak, right? So dollar invested that obviously put some eyes on the data and that drive further improvements in that system.
Yeah, and I think that that's the customers that we have the most success with are the ones that are in it for the long haul, right? There's a partnership between the technology providers, right? And at the end of the day, we have a lot of understanding of the process, and we're functional experts in how factories work and all of those things. But the customer that creates that partnership with us, that's has the vision of what can be done with the system, and is willing to start start with the small thing and then build upon that, is I think where the real opportunity for benefit is. And that leads me to one of the things we're doing at Grantek that is new, and it isn't a secret, but it's just coming out, that we're starting to talk about, is we have a program that's called Agile MES. So what we're doing there is trying to get rid of the waterfall, right? Here, who loves the waterfall approach to building any kind of a system, right? Nobody. Waterfall can be really dangerous if it's too high.
Yes.
But so what we're doing is we're going to the customer saying, look, we're gonna start with a very small, the very minimal viable solution, right? And so we're gonna go out and we're gonna study, and we're gonna find a piece of low-hanging fruit, and we're gonna pull that off the tree. We're gonna put an OEE system on, and we're just gonna grab the bottleneck of this filler and maybe the palletizer at the end, and just get the very bare bones solution in place to demonstrate that this thing can provide some useful information. And what happens there is a couple things. Is the customer immediately gets some feedback. They have a small investment, they get some feedback, and they get a learning cycle, right? Rather than have this big user requirements that we spend 3 months building, we go out and we get this quick win, and then they're smarter about what it is they really need, and what they ask us to build for them next, right? So this is a new thing for us, but we're getting some great positive feedback from some initial customers, and we think it makes a lot of sense going forward.
No, absolutely. I will make the comment that I run similar styles of implementation for exactly the same reasons that you were discussing, Huck. And after having gone through the cycles a number of times, I'm not sure I will ever go back to the legacy. I've seen too many, year-long, 2-year, 3-year MES projects that was a whiteboard sketch that you spend 2 or 3 years building that completely miss to go back to that, because the stakes are too high and the chances of missing is so high at this point.
I can say, and I hope I don't get in trouble with my marketing team, that we have turned down a proposal or two that were for big waterfall approaches. So for that reason, it's like this approach makes a lot of sense, and for some customers it's not going to work, right? If you have a greenfield facility and you need, you're going to switch this thing on in 6 months, you need all of the functionality to be there, right? You need to be able to make your product.
Absolutely.
But for a lot of customers that are that have an existing operation going and have found some money to go do some improvements, maybe it's adding quality or some tracking of raw materials through. This approach is better for them because, again, they don't have to define this fixed scope of work, and we don't have to try to figure out what they meant by all of that, right? We iterate, we allow ourselves to iterate. And so as we're learning what it is they really wanted, they're also learning the same thing, right? So yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And I will also point out that helps to alleviate the problem that I see a lot of time of an adoption issue. So you build the system, you get the input, but how do you get the people to use it? And as we mentioned, it historically has been okay, we're going to implement the system and then hope people use it. This is very much the baby steps. Show people that it'll make their lives easier, show people that it'll actually drive results. And then as you increase the scope and scale of the system, you're going to find more people willing to buy in. And if you can get the buy-in on the plant floor, that means that the system actually has a fighting chance in order to be adopted for the long term and actually get a return on investment for the dollars being spent.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah,
absolutely. And so Hank in the comments actually had a good comment. He said that it's a challenge to get useful data definitions from customers and departments. Small steps is a great approach to get input from the players. Very much what we were saying.
Right on.
I do have a question, I guess, on that dynamic. I think Dave made an excellent point on the training side. And what I've seen personally, again, from my experience, is that customers are somewhat unwilling to pay for those extra hours near the end, because they think that they will be delivered somewhat of a turnkey solution, and then you can simply walk away. So I'm curious to hear maybe, like, what are your thoughts on, embedding a resource after that system has been deployed that would, I guess, not only train, but like what I'm thinking, and it happens on some occasions, but would be looking through that data and suggesting, I guess, additional maybe changes that needed to be made in addition to the resources that the customer would commit, right? I'm curious about that dynamic. Do you see just the customer manage that data and suggest future improvements to that system, or do you see an embedded resource from the people who implemented it that would go through that data to some extent and recommend future solutions?
I've seen a mix of that, and Vlad, it's a really good point that we talked about the fact that this thing is a platform, whatever it is a platform for continuous improvement. And by definition, what that means, it's never going to be done, right? It's never finished. And we've definitely gotten to the end of projects where, we've delivered what we said we were going to do in the original proposal and more, on the customer still, hey, but what about this thing and that thing, right? And so so it is absolutely something that should be planned for, right? On both sides, the customer and the supplier side, of how are we going to manage that expectation at the end. And one of the things we're doing in the Agile approach is sometimes we'll have a defined, the customer comes and says, we want these 5 or 6 things. And so we develop the sprints where we're going to deliver this first minimal solution, and then the next sprint's going to add some things, and et cetera. And then in one specific case, we had a thing at the end that said, we're adding this extra sprint at the end. You haven't asked for it. We don't know if you're going to need it or want it, but we're putting this in the budget. And it's kind of a heads up that, the requirements are going to emerge and evolve over time. And so that was the idea with that one. And because the other thing that goes along with that is that most of our customers in the manufacturing space are dealing with capital budgets or annual budgets. And so, doing a total Agile thing where you say, well, we don't know how much it's going to cost. We're just going to keep doing sprints until the cows come home doesn't work, right? So you got to have some realistic boundaries around it when you start. But so that's one of the ways that we're trying to address that particular issue is having some dollars at the end that are, they're discretionary. So it's up to the customer at the beginning to say, yeah, I'm going to put that into my budget, or no, thank you, I don't want that. In which case, they've made the decision that, hey, when we're done, we're going to be done.
No, I think that makes sense. And let me ask a follow-up question on the kind of agile MES and kind of what you guys are doing at Grantek. Are you going and explaining the agile process to the end user, like in depth, or is it you kind of explain that we're going to do it, in pieces, and each, piece or sprint is a week or 2 weeks long? How in depth do you go when you explain agile to the end user?
It depends on the customer for sure, and at what level we're talking, right? But in at least one project I'm aware of, the customer is actually looking at user stories in Jira. We're using Jira as our sprint management tool, and in fact, they can create a new one that goes into the backlog.
Yep.
So they're very engaged in the process in that particular case. Some others
That's
are
awesome.
less involved in the details. Yeah, and actually that's where we want to be with it, right? And there's pluses and minuses to that too, right? They get to see a little bit about how the sausage is getting made, and sometimes that's not pretty. But it's but you build that. The thing that's good about it is you build that relationship, right? They have a better understanding of when they go and say, hey, I just need that one more drop down on the screen, that it's not a 5-minute job. Right. They start to get an understanding of, well, that just changed the query on the back end and et cetera. So, so if a customer's able to engage at that level, and some are and some aren't, but I think it's a good thing, as long as we have all of our gears turning in the right way, right?
Absolutely.
We also talked a little bit about subject matter expertise, and I think that's a very interesting topic for me, specifically coming in with an engineering background. And we talked a little bit off stream about the employment rates currently in both US and Canada, how the market is getting really interesting, or I'd say there's less and less engineers, so to speak, on the market. So how do you deal with maybe the problem, recruiting people, making sure that they know about your company, maybe specifically Grantek, if you can share about some details, and just what do you think, like in a general sense, like what is it going to take to keep talent on board? I think that's a very important, and I'd say like struggle for certain companies in many ways.
Got to be really careful answering this question, because I know there are some engineers at Grantek that are probably listening to this. So maybe I should actually get them on to answer the question. So first of all, it is our biggest constraint, right? Dave started a new poll today on LinkedIn asking people if they need work or if they're too busy, and we are definitely very busy, and we are aggressively hiring. And we're not alone. We're very active in CSIA, and we're hearing the same thing from our colleague companies. So having the enough people to do all the work is definitely a constraint. But the other side of that is, from my perspective, and my job is really leading the people who are doing work, right? And my goal is to build the environment that they want to work in, right? Because everything else flows from that. So, and if any of my engineers that are in my group are on the thing, you can feel free to put your comments in the chat, and Dave will let us know. But and so it is always and it's not about having beer or Pepsi in the fridge. It's about having processes that flow as far as defining the work, getting it cut out, having a standard way of delivering stuff, and making that clear all the way from the beginning of the sales cycle. So our client solutions people and our project managers, we're all in sync on understanding, understanding as best as we can what the customer needs, getting that communicated to them and pulling it through. And that if we do that process right, then the engineering team has a less chaotic work environment and gets to spend their time and energy building cool stuff rather than fighting fires for scope that wasn't understood well, or bugs that appeared because there wasn't cohesion in how we did our delivery. So, and I'm can't wait to see what the comments are, but I'm not going to tell you we're perfect at that, but we're being intentional about going from where we have been to that place where we want to be. And so to me, that's the point. That's the important part of addressing the constraint of resources, right? It's if you read this book, which we've talked about, identify the constraint, right, and do your best to elevate that constraint. And so that's one of the things that we're doing.
I'm very happy to. Sorry to interrupt. I'm very happy that that's the selling point that you mentioned. I think in the grand scheme of things, a lot of times I would say certain employers do kind of put forth the Pepsi in the fridge aspect before anything else, right? And I think treating your employees as also part of your, let's say, like customer, or you know what I mean, like you want to really manage, I think, that relationship really well. And I think if you put that as one of the first kind of values within your company, you're going to build successful teams and ultimately retain people. And that's, I think, like one of the key maybe frustrations you've mentioned for engineers, right? When there's like just too much chaos and they're not focused on doing the work that they would want to be doing, but rather trying to manage all these different interactions outside of that work. So
and that's, I mean, and I think that's the thing, is it's like the people who are good at this, they hold themselves to a higher standard, right? And they want to do good work and they want that to be appreciated. And so there's this natural accountability amongst the team if you enable that, right? If you give them the right working environment to be able to go deliver good stuff for their customers, then they're going to be happy and they're going to want to do more of that. And they're not going to jump when the market gets really hot and people are offering crazy salaries and all that stuff.
Can you show really quickly the book again? We've got somebody asking.
Sorry, it was a little bit of a tangent, but this is a book that actually was written in the mid '80s. It's The Goal by Ellie Goldratt, and it's a book about continuous improvement. It like a lot of the things we've been talking about are touched on in this book, and it's really about aligning the business so that all of the parts of the business work together to accomplish goal. I'm not going to tell you what the goal is. If you want to know, you have to read the book. But
I posted it in the comments so people can find it.
Yeah. Dave, you've read the book, right?
I have read the book. It has been a while since it's been a while since I've read it. But this is like the third conversation within the last 6 weeks that I've had about it. And as I mentioned yesterday, I'm going to have to see if the library has it or download it again somewhere for because it has been too long. And as you were showing yesterday, Huck, it is you've got all of those pages marked. And please go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say that actually the reason I have it here on my desk right now is because we are just finishing. Today is the last day. We have a book club going at Grantek, and we've been reading this book. And so every 2 weeks we have a section that we go through, and then we have a chat and a beer, and talk about the book and some of the learnings that come from it.
I believe we talked about making that perhaps a little more public. I don't know if you'd be willing to post some of those books. I think it would be helpful to the maybe LinkedIn community if you ever decide to reveal those readings through your profile. I think it would be very helpful.
You mean as far as the what we did in the book? Yeah, I
well,
mean,
not just that specific book, but on an ongoing basis. I think it'd be good to see what you're reading.
For sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, that was one of my plugs.
Is this the first book in book club?
Sorry?
I was going to say, is this the first book in book club?
This is not. It's been done a few times before, but we have a new effort that's like, we already have the next one planned. So this one's just finishing up. And,
exciting.
And yeah, I can't tell you what that is. It's a secret at this moment, but actually, I don't know. I don't know what it is. You have to ask Sam. But no, but my plug is yes, if we are, I will definitely, I'll make a post about our experience reading this book on LinkedIn. And in general, we have a bunch of other interesting things happening around smart manufacturing at Grantek. So follow Grantek on LinkedIn.
They publish really interesting white papers. I know that Grantek is fairly involved like in social media, and I think a lot of the like upper management actually publishes interesting articles, right, related to smart manufacturing, AI. Like there's all kinds of interesting information, more so than I would say many other technical companies. So
it is one of the things that I like about the company is there's an intentional investment in that bigger picture, right? We have several people who are their entire focus is on what is the future of smart manufacturing. My job is in engineering is to go, build the solutions and follow those guys. But we have a whole group of people who are focused on the, what's coming in the industry and where's it going and the goal of that is to make sure the company's headed in the right direction to meet the needs of our customers and even lead them in what's possible with the technologies.
If we want to tie back to our previous topic, so subject matter expertise and both smart manufacturing, I'm curious what your thoughts are on, as a team leader and essentially manager of many technical resources, what are your thoughts on like ever-changing technology and kind of the need to upskill, your people? Is that something like, obviously it has to be done, but how do you manage, keeping them maybe on let's say on a project versus making sure that they know the next thing that's coming up? And as you probably know, there's a lot of things constantly changing in this field. So how do you keep those two things balanced?
It's just the rate of change is just getting faster, right?
Yep. Yep, absolutely.
I saw something about, the change has been kind of linear and we're just now on this part of the exponential curve and just going to keep going faster. So there's a few things. First of all, we've been talking about smart manufacturing and in a lot of places you have controls engineers and you have SCADA engineers and you have people who are software engineers, right? And I think one of the things that we need to do as an industry is get rid of those lines, right, or walls, or the PLC engineer needs to understand, what's going on at the levels above, and not just the technology of, can you write Python code, but what's happening with the data that's coming in and out? Where's the data coming from, and where's it going for that PLC code that you're writing? And so I think that the better job we do of getting the people who are doing the work, wherever you are, understanding the all of it, right? I think that's one thing, right? Is to make sure people have the opportunity to understand more about the total solution in the big picture. And even, why does the packaging line care about OEE, right? What is the purpose of this downtime Pareto chart? So I think that's an important thing. But I think the other thing that as the technology and the capabilities and the expectations of what we're doing at the smart manufacturing layer evolve, we also need to rethink what we're doing at the controls layer, right? At all the layers, right? And how to engineer all those layers so that they work better together, right? So, for instance, I'll bet that one or both of you have worked with the system where recipes were stored inside the PLC, right? Who here thinks that's a good idea?
I've had moderate success with that with that system.
It's a terrible idea, Vlad.
I mean, after you get up to
like, why would we store the recipes in the PLC?
Like,
aren't there better places to put them?
Yeah.
I mean, they didn't have a server, they didn't want to invest the money. They already had a PLC, they had an HMI, so that's
But I mean, you get the point, right? It's going to be brittle in there, and if you have your array of 100 recipes, and we add one more parameter, now your array is broken. Or if we add the 101st product, you're stuck. And so I like to use that example because and for the right customer, it's fine, right? I mean, and sometimes as you all know, we're building real systems for real factories, and there are constraints, and so we're going to go do what we need to do for that customer. But we came from a world where all the intelligence was in the PLC, right? And the SCADA layer, back when I was a young man, all it was pretty pictures, right? It was graphics. And that's all. And so you had to put everything down in there. But now, as we have the capabilities to have more intelligence at the SCADA level and have an MES level and a PLM system, all of a sudden our horizons are different on where we can put the intelligence, right? And so I guess that's when talking about this. You asked about subject matter expert. I think the thinking, the mindset from the PLC level up needs to be more holistic, I guess.
No, I definitely agree. I guess on a small side note about that recipe implementation on the PLC, I guess what you described kind of happened at that facility. So at one point in time, they wanted the recipe management on the PLC. Then they told us, oh, it's going to be 40 to 50 recipes. Sure enough, you create like a fixed array in the PLC, and then everything runs fine. And then you figure out that the guy in the night shift, for whatever reason, like changes the recipe to what he needs, to what he gets, on paper from the team supervisor. And then there's I guess a full array of recipes, and you get a call to add more to that PLC. And sure enough, there is a limit that you can reach, but then it becomes like extremely inefficient. And so, then we had to issue a quote. And of course, that's where we kind of reached the discussion of like, we're going to have to send that data somewhere, right? They didn't have servers on-prem. And so cloud was not really an option too, because they were very reluctant to, store that data somewhere else, even though I don't really think that a recipe system is fully proprietary. But anyhow, that's a separate discussion.
Yeah.
And so, they kind of looked at the bill of that on-prem server setup and were very, I don't want to say like surprised completely, but I guess it was higher than expected, right, to implement something like that. And I think nowadays with different technologies, you can really be very flexible with some of those systems, right? Like recipe management doesn't fully need to be like on a on-prem server again, but also it's not a critical component, right, of your system. So there could be ways to kind of mesh it together with some recipes, let's say, store it on your SCADA system and then a lot of them in the cloud. But it's an interesting, I guess, scenario to go through that yourself and figure out some of the limits of the systems.
Yeah, and on that subject, we have customers who are deploying full-blown MES systems with OEE and SPC, and the servers are all in their corporate data centers. They're not on site. You know, they're not in Amazon's cloud, but they are not on-prem either. So I think that line is going to get blurrier as well as we move forward. Right.
Yeah.
And I would
I
say,
think
especially with, private LTE bands and 5G, and then it becomes less of an issue of how good is your uplink, because I know many places that, we couldn't deploy to the cloud 2, 3, 5 years ago because they had, they were shooting like a wave from like one section to another section, and they lost connectivity 2 or 3 times a week, and at that
Right.
point you would lose too much data to just be able to store it in the cloud. But with the ability to have more cellular and better networks in general, I think we're going to see a larger push to the cloud for the reason that Vlad said, because it costs a lot of money to put a server on-prem if you currently don't have servers on-prem and are not prepared for the upkeep and the maintenance and everything else that goes along with those.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Go ahead, Vlad.
we've got a question on YouTube, which is interesting. So how often do you find your team competing with another company based on price alone? So I think it's an interesting discussion, and I want to add to that as well, because I think in one sense, like, you're selling technical solutions, but you're also selling the expertise, like, of your company, the knowledge of the process, like the ability to investigate certain problems. So I guess my initial thought is that unless it's a very straightforward, maybe conversion, let's say, of a PLC or just like implementation, you're not purely competing on price. But I'm curious what your thought about that is. Like, you're selling, I think, more than just a like fixed solution.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And any given RFP that we get is going to have different layers of complexities and requirements that I think that I think that the price alone kind of days are for what we do. And I think you're right, Vlad. There still are some exceptions to this, but I think those days are kind of over. And I think what we're selling is the value proposition of building in the ideal world. We want to build that partnership for long-term, for long-term relationship. Because as when we do the first project with you, there's a learning curve of us understanding how you work and where your value really is, and et cetera. But over time, we're going to deliver more value for less money because we know you and we know what's going on. So I think that I think what else, actually, the way I'm going to answer that is talk to our marketing guys.
Good answer, Huck.
Yeah. They'll have a much more polished answer to that question. But seriously, I think and we talked about earlier of not bidding on RFP, not bidding on every RFP that comes in the door, and it is one of the analysis, right? Is if there's 8 other vendors and it's a fixed price and the scope is wobbly, we might not have the bandwidth for that one. Right. So
no, for sure. I mean, I think
I will add
Dave was gonna go ahead, Dave.
I was going to add to what Huck was saying, is that I think the days of bottom dollar pricing on many of these smart manufacturing systems are mostly gone. I think it's a lot of value, and what sort of value can you bring to the end user. A lot of the like fixed bid pricing that I see is in like the public sector. So like a lot of wastewater bids generally go to the lowest bid, And then a lot of times, many of like publicly traded companies, there is some amount of bidding process, but there isn't a great visibility in there. So they can still have a, ideal vendor and a preferred vendor. So even when you get to that point, price doesn't matter as much if it's not a publicly, if it's not like a governmental organization where anyone can go and look at the bids.
And that isn't our primary focus, right? So doing those kind of things.
Yeah, I think
absolutely.
Huck, you mentioned a good point too, because you must be willing to walk away at a certain point in time, right? Because it's just not worth working with a customer who's only fixated on let's get this at the lowest price possible. And I think again, if you're trying to build that long-term relationship, it really perhaps sets the tone, right? If that's really the only thing that you're concerned about. Not to say that price is not important, but there's maybe other things that they should be looking for and putting maybe at the higher level.
Yeah.
If we want to go back to technical discussion a little bit, so we had good conversation yesterday about OEE and how sometimes you come into the facility and maybe your initial engagement would be to kick off that relationship with implementing something like OEE, and maybe the downfall, if I may, that we see, that probably all three of us have seen, is that system is going to be to some extent remain unutilized, right? And customers will not necessarily drive those improvements. And so like the question I guess then would be, or maybe the discussion that we can have is around what would be maybe the steps, in a practical sense. So a customer receives like an OEE system that tracks the OEE, let's say on a per line or maybe per asset basis. What is the next step for them to kind of start implementing those changes?
I'm going to start by saying I hate OEE.
Mm-hmm.
So actually, that's it. That's all I'm going to say. No, I'm kidding.
Next question, Vlad.
Next question, Vlad. Yeah. And the reason I say that is because it's absolutely a useful, can actually be a useful thing to understand, but it's only going to tell you part of the picture. And one of my problems with it is it gets implemented incorrectly for a lot of reasons. A lot of times the people on the floor already know where the low-hanging fruit is. I mean, if you do it right, OEE is going to help you understand, where you're losing efficiency and where your downtime is. The downtime Pareto is actually my favorite part of the OEE. Is I think that's the most useful bit. But people don't. A lot of times I don't care about the OEE number for my labeler, right? I care about the filler. It's going to be my bottleneck, right?
Right.
That labeler should be idle, right? And it should be blocked most of the time, right? I'm assuming that. Sorry, I should have started. The labeler is upstream from the filler, right? So if the labeler is upstream from the filler, I want it to be blocked, right? I don't care if it's waiting for more bottles to label. I want to keep my filler going, and so what I might care about the downtime of the downtime Pareto of that labeler if it's if it becomes a problem, or if my filler becomes starved because that thing's not doing its job, then I start to care more about it. But so what I have seen in the past, and not the very recent past, but is that the OEE system gets put in by the technologist and the line supervisor whose job it is to manage those metrics, gets the numbers and doesn't do anything with them, right? And there isn't that focus on, well, which parts of OEE do we care about for this line, right? Is the filler our bottleneck? Which, and if it's fine, then probably the filler is a bottleneck. So let's put all of our energy around getting the best information on that particular machine and worry less about the others. And that's one of the things that we're doing with the Agile approach is going in and identifying that part first, right? So that we can focus on the parts that make the most sense.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting that, the level of detail that you mentioned. I think, again, from my experience, I think that that information never really gets maybe to the plant floor and the people who will be, looking at that data. So they don't, again, only based on what I've seen, they don't fully understand those nuances, right? They might have that sense of, what the bottleneck machine is from walking the line, but they don't necessarily translate that into the data that they see then on the dashboard. And I think it's also, on the technology side, it doesn't always get implemented the same by different vendors. And I don't think there's always that link being made to the people who look at the data about, how is that data being presented. But I think it is a very important point. And I don't know maybe what the solution is on how to train them and explain to people, because I think it takes maybe not necessarily an engineering mindset, but a deep understanding of the process as well as the data to kind of see it for the true kind of sense of what it is, right? It's not a trivial thing.
Well, right. I think that, so a couple of things on that. One is absolutely the more you can get your operations people who are on the floor that are interacting with the process and the production, the more they can understand about the big picture, the better. And a lot of times we see room for improvement on factory floors. But for OEE, the real consumers of that data are the product engineers and the process engineers and the operations managers and the plant manager, right? And if we do it right, and if they are, as we talked earlier, ready to receive this information, this system, then that those numbers and those Pareto charts are information that allows them to make smart decisions about improving that throughput, right? And so they're the primary consumers of that data. But the downside and the potential for failure there, and that I have seen, is the OEE is like this easy place to get started with MES, and that gets sold, throughout the industry, and that's probably the main thing I hate about it. Actually, not the actual. If you do it right, it's a good thing. But the fact that you want to do MES, so let's start with OEE. Well, the problem with that is if they don't have a demonstrated need for that, and that it's just it's an easy way to get started, then they're not going to see value, and then they're not going to do anything else. They're going to put in this platform for continuous improvement, and they're not going to see the first improvement, and so then they're never going to even think about investing in what could be the second and third improvements.
Yeah, I agree. Dave, what do you think? That's
I certainly
do as well.
I certainly agree with what you guys said, and I appreciate your thoughts on it, Huck. And kind of to mirror and like go a little bit further to what Vlad was saying, is that I think there are certainly a lot of people on the floor, maybe engineering managers, who know what the bottlenecks are. I have more oftentimes than I wish to count had conversations at the plant manager or the executive level, and they need the data. They want to see the data to know that it's the filler, or to know that it's a particular thing, or to know that they've quite literally run out of the stuff as raw materials in order to be able to run through the process. Like, I've had that conversation more than once, and they want to see the data, and that is kind of what leads you down the path to implementing OEE or something along those lines across the entire line, so that we're able to use the data to pinpoint what it is. But if you are working with management and you can explain to them, and it's a line, and it's obviously the filler that is the bottleneck, because it's always the filler that's the bottleneck, and you can go and stand there for a couple of hours and see it, then you can have those conversations and potentially move into a smaller implementation that delivers a lot more value quickly. Because at the end of the day, the goal is to deliver as much value as possible to begin with, so that you can move to the next phase of the continuous improvement cycle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's spot on. And I don't really hate OEE, Dave. I was just being hyperbolic.
I think you say it because you know that I'll laugh every time you say it, Huck. No, awesome. So I know that we want to be cognizant of Huck's time and everyone's time. Vlad, do you have any last questions to ask before I ask Huck to tell people about what they're doing at Grantek and who should reach out to them?
We can dive into, what I don't think we ever like did a full introduction with Huck. I think we kind of glanced over that with your initial question and dove into a whole bunch of other
Oh,
topics.
you're right. We didn't.
But what if
Uh,
we
That's one thing I've noticed that we're terrible at, Huck, is
the
that
introduction part.
it's less the introduction and it's more the please tell us a little bit of your background. So do you think you can give everyone a like a brief recap of your background and how you've managed to find yourself here with us today?
Sure. Sure. Who here remembers the Modicon 584?
Pictures.
Same.
So I've been doing industrial controls and manufacturing systems for my whole career, and that was the first PLC that I wrote code for, and it was for a Budweiser factory, and I did all these bit shift left routines in the code, and my engineering manager came back and said, you have to take all of that out. We have an agreement with the union that it has to look exactly like an electrical ladder logic diagram. And so that was the beginning of my career in this space. But in that initial company, we were actually doing MES level stuff way back in that day. We didn't know it was called MES, but my career's always been around building the software systems that were getting data in and out of the process. And so I've gotten to see a lot of different industries and a lot of different layers of that, from the PLC layer and the SCADA and most of it's been in manufacturing, but there's been some other stuff. And along the way, I've got my hands dirty with PLC code, as well as supplying panels, not designing them. I was smart enough to get somebody smarter than me to do that part. But yeah, I've done a bunch of different things and gotten to one of the things I love about the industry is there's the opportunity to go see the world, because our projects are everywhere, right? And so I've taken advantage of some of those opportunities and gotten to get out of my comfort zone, if you will. And so yeah, I think that's probably the highlights.
No, I think that's amazing. Thank you for that, Huck. I think Vlad had a comment.
Well, what about today? What about your current involvement with Grantek? What is that like?
Okay, so yeah, Dave introduced me at the beginning and gave my long-winded title.
What's the title, right? We want to know the.
I don't actually. What is it again, Dave? Can you tell me?
No. So we've got Associate Director Engineering Smart Manufacturing Solutions. Does that even fit on a business card?
Actually, I don't have a business card. I need to talk to Angie about that. So yeah, so my job at Grantek really is leading the engineering side. I mentioned earlier that we have a person on the business side that's looking after what's the future and what should we be doing in smart manufacturing space. My job is to lead the engineering of how are we going to build these systems, and how are we going to make sure that our people have the processes to do the work. And so it's a new role for me, and it's challenging and exciting, and I'm having a lot of fun with it.
No, that is awesome. And then, do you have I know you're more on the technical side. Do you have an ask if there are people listening, either who are talent looking for a new position or who are customers maybe looking for what you guys are offering?
Well, I mean, I think both of those things are clearly important to us. But yeah, if you have experience in building smart manufacturing systems, MES or analytics, or doing some work with data lakes and that sort of thing in our future. So yeah, please reach out, and it would be great to have conversations. If our customer engagement model sounds interesting, the Agile MES thing, we're getting lots of great feedback from customers on that. We're really interested in furthering that approach to our business.
That's amazing. Thank you, Huck. And while you were saying that, Sam in the comments says that your business card is an 8.5 by 11.
Thanks, Sam. Sam is my counterpart. He's the guy. So here's the story that I told Sam. So Sam's out front. You know the big fire engine that has a steering wheel at the front and at the back, right? Mm-hmm. So that they can get around the corners. So Sam's steering the front of the fire engine. I'm the one in the back that makes sure we don't run over anything.
Makes sense.
I love it. No, thank you for that, Huck. Vlad, do you want to close this out and maybe tease what we're gonna start with next week?
Yeah, so as we've mentioned at the beginning of the couple of episodes, we are doing these themes, right? So this was smart manufacturing and manufacturing intelligence. And so we've already asked Huck a few questions around this topic, but what we want to dive into even further is the human side of I'd say manufacturing transformation. And I think that has to do with, recruiting, that has to do, again, like I've asked a little bit, keeping your engineers. It has to do with all sorts of things related with talent management in the technical space. So that's what we're going to be talking about with Dave in the next month. And I think it's a very, very interesting topic, given the current growth in the manufacturing space that we've seen over the last year, especially, but just in general. But with that, Huck, really appreciate your time. Thank you again. I think it's been very interesting. We've got some really good comments, and there's going to be, I think, a lot more to come as we post this on all the social platforms. Is there any place that you'd prefer people maybe reach out? Because we do post links at the bottom. Is it through LinkedIn, email, whatever you want to share? Or
reach out to me directly using the LinkedIn connection, and then if you have questions for Grantek in general, you can contact them. They're very responsive there as well. So yeah, and thanks for having me on the show. I've enjoyed the conversation, and all the best in your future ones.
Appreciate it. We always have many more questions, but as they've mentioned, we've always gone over the time that we typically schedule for 45 minutes, and now it's been over an hour. So really appreciate it, Huck.
Yeah, if you have questions specific that you want to ask me, either reach out or post them on the LinkedIn event page, and I promise to answer them.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Huck.
Cheers,
Thank you, everyone.
See you.